Welcome back to The Heat. We're talking about the economic challenges South Africa is currently trying to overcome. Let's get back to our panel right now. Pusch Commey, the former South African Finance Minister, Pravin Gordhan, who was fired by President Zuma, recently outlined the challenges that the country is facing since the end of apartheid. Let's take a listen to what he said.
The relationships between labor and capital, between rich and poor, black and white, men and women, town and township, urban and rural, still reflect the entrenched legacy of colonialism and apartheid. It's produced and allocated along lines that remain fundamentally unjust. The ownership of assets and the distribution of income is captured by a minority of the population, a situation that is both morally wrong and economically unsustainable.
So, Pusch, we know of these imbalances that exist in South Africa. President Zuma has proposed a redistribution of economic wealth to the poor to address this imbalance. Will that work?
Yeah. Well, I believe that, right from after the transition to democracy, there were many people in the country who were calling for the implementation of what we call the Freedom Charter by the ANC, before the transition. Talking about nationalization of mines, nationalization of the financial system, to redress the imbalances caused by decades of colonialism and apartheid. But I believe after that, Mandela and the government, the ANC government, realized that that was not practicable. Was not practical. So as a result, then you had several programs that have tried to redress the legacies of apartheid and colonialism. They had the GIA, they had the ASGISA, and they had the National Development Plan. But all that seems not to have addressed the problem of inequalities, which in South Africa is supposed to be, to be the most unequal country in the world with a Gini coefficient of 0.67. So the program seemed not to have worked. And as a result, the government has come up with the National Development Plan, by which there can be cooperation between various sectors of the economy. Labor, in which we have the black majority, and then we have business, which is, from history, has been controlled by a white minority. But the labor has been complaining that you find institutional resistance, when it comes to a meaningful participation of the black majority, who form about 80% of the population, a meaningful participation in the economy. So we have a very interesting scenario, and most people don't know where this is going to go, especially in the light of a decline in the economy.
Okay. Dorina, the legacy of apartheid certainly plays a big factor. It's a big factor in the situation in which South Africa finds itself right now. But what do you make of what the government is doing in South Africa to try and overcome that legacy?
Well, I think that right now the government finds itself sort of stuck. There's a lot of expectation in 1994, and what we haven't seen are the dividends. In other countries that might have suffered conflict, we would call it the peace dividend. Right. But that's not dissimilar to what the expectation was in South Africa. And now the questions are being posed to the ANC in particular, but I think fairly to the rest of the political class. How do we get over this huge gap in inequality? And it is an immense challenge. How do you, invest in human capital so that they have the wherewithal to realize, their goals?
Right. Tshepo Kgadima, no doubt the government in South Africa wants to address these imbalances, but when foreign investors, and you're a businessman yourself, you would know this, when foreign investors hear terms like redistribution of wealth, is it going to attract investment into South Africa?
Well, look, I think investment at all material times is attracted by the highest return that can be realized by the investor. So you find that even certain areas or countries that are very difficult geopolitically, but they still are able to attract investment. I think in the case of South Africa, we all agree that the imbalances of the past, the legacy of apartheid, has really had a profound impact on the current problems of high unemployment, high poverty levels, as well as the highest inequality. But in terms of how do we then redistribute, how do we then, the term that is being used is radical economic transformation. The tools or the instruments that can be used to be able to address these imbalances of the past and be able to achieve radical economic transformation, the country, we are not yet fully agreed. And largely is because the multiplicity of diverse voices I referred to earlier, largely from the governing party being the African National Congress, that they have not been able to communicate in clear tones what it actually means and what needs to be put in place to address these imbalances. But in my view, is that unless the finance is the foundation of politics, unless you've got a macroeconomic policy that encourages the pooling of capital and developing of not just building up investor confidence from foreigners, but domestically being able to galvanize the capital markets, develop them, whereby you can have even ordinary people being able to participate in various investment schemes. Those will go into the productive sectors of the economy.
Right, Wenping, we just have a little bit of time left, but I want to get back to something you talked about earlier on, and that is BRICS, the BRICS group of countries. South Africa is a member of that group. It's also a member of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, that is the investment bank which is Chinese-led. How much can Chinese investment and development help South Africa?
Yes, in this coming September, the BRICS summit will be taking place in China's city called Xiamen. So that will bring the international folks again to this BRICS group. So BRICS, even though several countries like South Africa, Brazil, and also Russia, they have suffered some kind of economic slowdown, but this group itself, I think, still shows its potential and its power. I think this is not something very pessimistic. We should have a long-term point of view. Even though they have suffered somehow, but with a group and the other countries, they can also help, offer those help hand. Like you mentioned, the AIIB is the new multilateral bank established in the year 2016. And this bank becoming another financial institution apart from those World Bank and the IMF. So it can offer a very strong help for those infrastructure building, not only in Asia and also in Africa. I also heard a new company is called the Infrastructure Investment Company, now coming from China, now set up its headquarters now in South Africa, not long ago, that's 2 months ago. And it has its capital authority as many as like 500 million US dollar. So it's going to be set up as a headquarters in South Africa and then to focus on infrastructure construction. So in South Africa, it also will host as a regional bank branch for this new development bank. That's a BRICS Bank in South Africa. So that will give South Africa new, I think, engine for financially and also for infrastructure building. So that will be two other new development area.
Okay, Pusch Commey, I only have 30 seconds left, but I want to address one final issue, and that is South Africa is the continent's most advanced economy. What kind of impact is its economic problems having on other African countries?
It has a significant impact, especially with respect to the economies in the region. Namibia, Lesotho, Swaziland, Botswana, Zimbabwe. South Africa's economic problems, also, what that means is that when it comes to intra-African trade or trade with its neighbors, they limiting importation of goods, to boost these economies. And we also now we see that with the decline in some of these economies, like in Zimbabwe, Mozambique, you get an influx of of their citizens into South Africa. That has also created social problems, leading to xenophobia and social tensions. So yes, South Africa being a big economy relatively in Africa, its impact is massively felt. Its companies in other countries like MTN in Nigeria and various places are also losing money, and the result would mean that they also withdrawing from the rest of Africa, because then they have internal problems.
Okay.
So it becomes a big distraction, and its impact it's significant.
Okay. We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat.